Hey BookTube! This video is going to be my July reading wrap-up, and that means it's time for my Medieval-athon results. Why yes, I did just buy myself a crown for completing a readathon. I earned it. So I am going to wear this for the rest of the video because although it's hella uncomfortable, I'm a queen and we do this for the aesthetic, so if I can lift these up. I read 10 whole books in the month of July, which is more books than I've ever read in a month being on BookTube before. I think it's like just shy of like 3,700 pages-ish. So like I had a great reading month. I read all the books. I read so many books. Initially I was only going to read the 6 or 7 books for my Medieval-athon like TBR, but you know, I hate myself, so I added in a further 3 books and somehow managed to read them all. So as I go through, as well as giving like my ratings for the books, I'll probably tell you as well like which challenge I like used the book for and whatnot. So the first book that I read this month was The Curse of Chalion by Lois McMaster Bujold, and let me tell you, this book is now just one of my favourite books of all times. I can't even delay saying that I rated this 5 out of 5 stars. This book was fantastic, everything I'm looking for in a book. I loved this so much. I just kind of picked this up on a whim because it was one of the cheapest fantasy books available online, and it turned out to be just one of the best books I've ever read. I loved this. I especially loved the characters. It was just such a nice surprise. So the book follows a character called Luke de Casaril, who used to be a general in the army, but he was, through some like underhanded dealings of some sort of backstabby nobles, he was sold into slavery for several years, and after managing to escape, he is on his way home to the castle where he once served as a page as a boy. He ends up being assigned the post of secretary tutor to the Princess Iselle, and it's not long before the princess's household find themselves on the way to the capital, where there is political intrigue and demonic possession abound. Honestly, this book just follows the sweetest old man. Like, he's just one of my newest favourite characters ever. He's just a real nice old man. And he just really wants the best for the young women that he watches over, and he just gets caught up in this weird demonic religious plot, and it's somehow like both very theological and yet completely rooted in like this whole interpersonal politicking for the throne sort of deal. It's very good. It is fairly like small scale for a fantasy because it mainly does just follow on the one man within the princess's household and like what they're doing, and it's not like a huge overarching like big epic fantasy, but it is just fantastically written, and I loved this book. I loved it so much. It's just one of my all-time favorites now. I can see that probably like within the next few years I'm gonna have reread this a dozen times. It's just fantastic, and I've never heard anyone else ever talk about this book, and it's such a good fantasy novel, and it's clearly so overlooked. I think it's because it came out in like 2001 and it's an adult fantasy, so like it's not YA or anything like that, so like it's clearly not been like the most popular thing ever, but it is fantastic and it just has a real special place in my heart now, and I'm so pleased to have read this book because it's just one of my new all-time favorites and I love it. And if you think you would like this sort of fantasy, please pick it up because it was just so good. So this also fulfilled the challenge to read a book with yellow pages. I don't know if you can tell, but they are pretty yellowed, so I got myself a nice pair of boots for reading this, and I became a peasant. The next book that I read, which was in one of my like little Medieval-athon vlogs, was Hard in Hightown by Varric Tethras, aka Mary Kirby. So if you have played the Dragon Age games, you'll know that Varric Tethras is a fictional dwarf from within those games, and he's an author and writer, and this is like one of the fictional books that he publishes in that game. And I guess they just, you know, printed it so that you can read it. It's got some illustrations in there. It's very short, but it does have mercenaries in it, so I got a nice axe. So even though I am like a massive Dragon Age fan, I unfortunately only gave this book a 2-star rating. It's not that it's specifically bad, it's just that it's kind of gimmicky in the sense that it's like, it's really heavily just trying to like hint and make reference to the source material of the games. It's like, oh, do you remember this character and this and this, and it's fun, but again it's really short as well, and the story is extremely linear and really basic, and so like it wasn't enough for me to rate any higher. I didn't dislike it. A 2 stars means that like it was okay, but yeah, it was just too short, too linear, and while it was fun to like be back in Kirkwall and the world of Dragon Age, it was just kind of like every other character in there was another like fictional spin-off of one of the main characters from Dragon Age 2, and that's kind of like the gimmick, and you're just kind of mainly reading this to see like where all the characters will just randomly pop up. So yeah, I could only really rate this 2 stars. It wasn't bad. It was fun, but not the best. So the third book that I read for Medieval-athon was Wicked Saints by Emily A. Duncan, and I have a whole rant slash review on my feelings for this book, and it does contain spoilers, so be warned. But if you would like a more in-depth discussion about how I felt about this book, then by all means please go click on that link. So this is a Slavic-inspired young adult fantasy that follows a girl called Nadia who can hear the voices of gods, and they grant her access to magical powers. And she's from a country which has been at war for a very long time with a neighbouring country of blood mages who don't believe in their religion and kind of want to reject it and overthrow it, but Nadia's country views them as evil heretics who are using this forbidden magic. So there's a lot of like dark, bloody magic in this, and there are a lot of references to like religion and like the in-world theology. Unfortunately, I only rated this a 3 out of 5 stars, and by that I mean I liked it. It was entertaining, but I kind of thought it was also kind of trash. Overall, I just felt very let down by this book. It entertained me, but in a way that like I knew it wasn't good, but I was still entertained by the book. So I feel like there is some value in it still, and I have said that I think I will go on to read the second book in this series just to see if it gets any better, because I think it does have potential. But ultimately I just wasn't convinced by this book. I thought that the plot was very lackluster, and it just seemed to skip about and not really be the sort of realistic plot that people would make. Again, it was very, very romance heavy, and it was just, it reads like a Darkling Alina fanfiction for the most part. I just thought the characters were very one note. I absolutely despise Nadia, the main character. I feel like she's barely a character in her own story, which is saying something, and it's not a good something. Again, more spoilery explanations in my like rant slash review of this book. Thankfully, it only took me like 2 days to read, and I used this for the prompt of a character who fights for the throne. There is a prince in this book called Seraphin, and there's some like political maneuverings, there's like some throne inheritance plot part to this book, so that is why I went with it for that. I don't think it's a stretch. I think it counts. So the next book I read this month was The Adamantine Palace by Stephen Dees. So this is supposedly a book about a dragon that gets loose and goes rogue, and without this sort of drug that the people have been giving to dragons for centuries, they will regain their memories and essentially become extremely powerful and extremely dangerous. And obviously the people do not want that to happen, but it's like it's kind of kept under wraps. Not a lot of people know about it, and basically everyone in this world is a dragon rider of some sort. Like, there are hundreds of dragons in this book, so if you want a book with dragons in it, maybe the one for you. I only rated this 2 stars. I was really disappointed by it. It's really short, but it took me such a long time to finish just because I kind of didn't want to read it. There are a lot of characters in this book, and I didn't really connect with any of them. I didn't really feel that many of them were fleshed out, or not so much likable, because I don't think you're really meant to like any of the characters in this, but they weren't, I didn't care about any of them. I didn't really care what happened to a lot of them. I will say there are some cool female characters in this. I feel like there's a decent amount of representation for both sexes, so like that's something. So if you are again looking for like diverse female characters, many of whom are dragon riders, again, possibly the book for you. And the first character that we're introduced to is like super dislikable, but very like scheming, and again there's like a lot of politics and scheming and like fighting for like it's not the throne, but there's something kind of like a throne in this that's like better than a throne. Ultimately though, I just didn't really like any of the characters, and I didn't like the direction that the book took. It just wasn't my thing. I wasn't really engaged with the plot, and I kind of realised that I didn't care about the story that this book was trying to tell. I think that's more of like me personally. It just wasn't my thing. It switches perspectives between so many characters so often, and some of those characters we only ever see their perspective once, and then they're dead and it's somebody else's perspective. It just doesn't give you enough time really with any one character to get to understand them and like them and know them, and the characters that it does spend a lot of time with are kind of inherently, you're just not meant to like them. Even though it's like kind of fun sometimes to read about what they're doing, it's not the best. It wasn't the book for me. And it has a dragon on the front, so I got a nice shiny helmet out of this book from the prompt of reading a book with a dragon on the front cover. But other than that, the book didn't really have a lot of merit for me. It just wasn't my thing. So yeah, kind of disappointed with this one. I'm definitely not going to pick up the rest of the books in the series, and I'm probably going to unhaul this at some point. I didn't hate it, but it's just really not the book for me. So the fifth book that I read was my thick paperback in order to get a pair of greaves, and I read Defiance by Claire Delis. This is like just short of 600 pages long, so it is a thick paperback. So this is the second book in a self-published fantasy series. It follows a girl named Astrid who is half elf and half dwarf, and she's acting as like the guide slash companion to a dwarf and his like young charge as she guides them across the land of Ammerstein. This book just picks off straight from where the last one left off, so I'm not really going to give any spoilers, but it just continues their story and their journey, and this book starts to feature chapters from the perspective of several goblin characters who are clearly like meant to be like the enemy, but again, you like those characters as well. I can't really say very much without giving like spoilers for the first book. Again, if you did want to read this series, I think the author is making it free to read on her website, and I think it's also in like a fully drawn comic format as well. But yeah, I did only rate this 2 stars just because it is a very long book and it's very linear. It's just getting from point A to point B, and it really does have like that whole middle book syndrome where you just sort of, there's book 1 which is the start, and there's going to be book 3 which is the end, and this is just like the in-between stuff of just literally getting from point A to point B. I always like the tone of these books, but it just didn't keep me that interested. I think the first book was better, just I guess because it was like a first book. There was a lot more like with the goblins in here, and I like their weird dragon horses and stuff, like that was good. And again, this is a self-published novel, and I don't think it's like edited or anything like that. I don't mean that in a bad way, I just mean this is like one girl, one woman who has just worked on this herself and published it. So it was a series that I enjoyed overall. I don't think she's physically publishing the third one at all. You just read it on her website as and when it gets to that point. But yeah, I was glad to pick these up. I was glad to support Claire in her like artistic endeavours. She is a YouTuber as well, but not a booktuber. So I was glad to read these. I like to have them. But yeah, it just wasn't quite up to like my typical standard. The next book I read is a controversial one, and that is Captive Prince by C.S. Pacat. So this is an adult romance story set against like the backdrop of a fictional universe. I don't really want to say fantasy. It's kind of Greek and Roman inspired for the most part, although I think like the enemy country is meant to be like kind of French, maybe. Essentially, one warrior prince is captured and shipped off in the middle of the night to be a pleasure slave for the prince of the enemy country, and you can kind of imagine where the rest of the book is going to go. I was expecting to be kind of angry with this, and I know a lot of people definitely don't like this book. I still haven't decided my opinion. I'm definitely not a fan of what I think is eventually going to turn into like a Stockholm Syndrome kind of mess, but it's not at that point yet. The princes still don't like each other, and nothing's really happened. So like so far it's been quite clear on its portrayal of like what we would expect to be acceptable and not acceptable, so like I can't really complain yet. I say as if I'm like waiting to complain. But yeah, I actually picked this up a long time ago because some anime fans like were recommending it based on like if you read stuff like Yonadako, or if you read Michinoku Atami, or like 10 Count or anything like that. They were like saying, oh yeah, you should read Captive Prince. I don't really see the connection. There's like one connection, and it's not the best. So yeah, I think I rated this 2 stars. It was such a quick read for me. This book was almost like a palette cleanser between my other reads, and yeah, I think I might continue with the series, but I don't think I'm really going to enjoy it or like it that much. It was just such a quick read that it was like I blinked and it was over. So, you know, I gotta get that Goodreads challenge, you know? So yeah, I was kind of I don't want to say cheaty. I read this for a book with red on the cover, so there is like red on this award stamp, and there's like red on the spine, and there's red text, and that's red enough. And reading a book with red on the cover netted you a cloak in the challenges. And after I had read that book, I became a queen, because that was my 6th book. So at that point, I'd essentially like won the Medieval-athon, but there were still books and challenges that I like wanted to complete, because I wanted my weapons and I wanted like other bits of armor. So I just decided to read one book for every single prompt that I could. So after that, the next book that I read was Nevernight by J. Kristoff. Let me tell you, this book was so good. This was my other 5-star book of the month, and this is only my 2nd 5-star book of the year. I know, right? Like 2 5-star books in 1 month, in one readathon. Like that's a really good month for me. So this is a dark adult fantasy book inspired by like Rome, and it follows Mia, who is a girl who is being trained to enter the like assassin school. It's called the Red Church, and because of her quite like dark and depressing past, she's been training her whole life to enter this church so that she can get the skills and the resources that she needs to seek revenge against the people in the past who wronged her. This book is very satisfyingly dark, gory, gritty, and very steamy in places. It's a very good book, and I love the way that J. Kristoff writes. I feel like he writes with, aside from the fact that the prose is wonderful, and I paid attention to every single word, every single line on the page. Like, I was never bored at any one moment. Like, it just held my attention all the way through, and it was fantastic for that. The book does have like footnotes as well, where there is a lot of like witty humour and side comments from the voice of the narrator, and the humour's like really, it is dark humour and it's very dry, but it's also got like a little air of eccentricity about it, and it's just very funny. It's just a really great book, and I love this. And if you're into like dark adult fantasies and you don't mind a bit of gore, then like I would highly recommend picking this one up. It was fantastic. I really love just how unique the world is, and you wouldn't think so when it's just like vaguely based on like a sort of Romanesque society, but for the most part, just the way that the world works and the way that the society and the religion and the culture is all sort of centered around like this one aspect of it is it's just fantastic. And I really liked just how solid and well grounded this whole book felt. It was really great. I couldn't find a single thing to fault with this entire book. Unless technically you count, there was one typo where there was a random 0 in the middle of the page. But other than that, I couldn't find literally a single thing wrong with this whole book. It was fantastic. I loved it. J. Kristoff is now one of my new favourite writers, and I'm so hyped for when eventually Dark Dawn will come out in September. So because this book has assassins in it, I used that for the prompt of getting a dagger, which was just to read a book with assassins in it. So that was like nice and easy. So then like obviously the next book that I picked up was God's Grave, book 2 of the Nevernight Chronicle. Also by J. Kristoff, obviously. So yeah, I can't really say very much about this book, but God's Grave does just follow on from the end of Nevernight. Again, it's kind of different in tone because obviously you're on like a new part of the story. I'm not going to say anything like spoiler wise. I did really like this book. There were just a few things that I think the first book did a little bit better. I think I just enjoyed that environment and that part of the story more, so I did only rate this technically like a 4 stars, but like more like a 4.75 stars if we're being honest. So it was slightly lower rated, but I still loved this and I'm still very excited for the finale. So I used this to get a sword, which was to read a book with something pointy on the cover, and there's a nice sharp pointy sword right on the cover here. Nevernight and God's Grave were also the 2 books that I knew that I wanted to read this month, so like I'm really glad that I've finally got them off my TBR, like not in an out of the way kind of way because I really enjoyed reading them, but like I'm just super glad that I've finally read them, and it was so worth the wait. But also I can't believe I didn't read them sooner. They really were fantastic books. So the 9th and penultimate book that I read this month was Mort by Terry Pratchett, and I don't know if you can see, but this gold text here is actually like, it's shiny. It's kind of like a dull gold leaf almost. So I used this book for the prompt of reading a book with like a shiny cover or something shiny on the cover, which was to get a breastplate. So Mort is one of the books, I think it's the 4th book in Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, so it's set on the disc. and it follows a boy called Mort who is employed to be like Death's apprentice. Death is a character in the Discworld and he's great. He's like the best Discworld character. So Mort essentially goes around reaping souls and having some issues with it, and I don't really know how to really describe Terry Pratchett's books because they don't really have much of a plot. It's weird to say, but stuff happens and it's interesting and funny, and it's just the whole book, it's kind of like a comedy fantasy for the most part. It's just really witty and amusing and funny, and it's really short, which was really good for the readathon. And I had read this one before. I'd read it when I was a kid. Yeah, it was just kind of nice getting back into Discworld. And then finally, the last book that I read for July was The Infernal City by Greg Keyes. This is the first of 2 books that are set in the Elder Scrolls universe. So if you're not like an avid video gamer, the Elder Scrolls are, it's the series of video games that Skyrim is a part of, and these books came out shortly after the video game Oblivion, which is the one before Skyrim. So it kind of follows on 50 years after the events of Oblivion. I have mixed feelings about this book. The first thing to say is that usually video game books will be accessible to people who haven't played the video games, so even if you've not played the game, you could still pick up the book and read it and appreciate the story. Not with this. This book assumes that you have played Oblivion and that you are very familiar with the lore, the way the world works, all the different races, multiple different like types of creatures and such, and geographical locations. Essentially, this book never explains anything, so because it expects you to already have all this prior knowledge, whenever there is like a word very specific to the universe, it never explains it. It never says, like, it never explains what it is. It's just used as though you're expected to know the word, and then it moves on. Thankfully for me, I'm a massive fan of the Elder Scrolls series, so I do know all the words. But yeah, it's unfortunate that I can't recommend this really to anyone who hasn't like played the games and read a lot of the background lore around it as well. I really liked that aspect of it because I'm familiar and I don't like to be babied, but at the same time it's unfortunate that like I can't recommend this to really anyone unless, I mean, if I was able to recommend this to you, you probably already know about it. That's like the kind of level that this book is. So it did promise that it would have a floating city in it, which it did, and that it would feature like a whole cast of characters. I kind of expected it to be almost a little bit Dungeons and Dragons like, where you have all these different people from different walks of life, like a prince with a secret and this potion making girl, the Argonian, like this wronged dark elf who has something to do with the Daedra, like all coming together. And I think there's more characters actually, but all like coming together and I guess working together to take down this evil. But for the most part, their stories don't really intersect, and I'm gonna be honest, like the first 100 pages of this book, I think, I've never really seen the show, but I think there's a show and it's called like Cutthroat Kitchen, and I think like all the chefs in it can like give each other like handicaps, like you have to cook blindfolded or cook with a flamethrower or something like that. I feel like that's the kind of show that it is, or at least what I've seen from the memes. The first 100 pages of this book are like a weird interdimensional version of that. So there was a lot of cooking in the first 100 pages, and it was not what I expected. And I was kind of really losing hope for the book. I was kind of like, is this seriously what this book is going to be about? Like, I just genuinely did not care about all these like cooking souls and stuff. Like, I did not care. But then thankfully for me, after about 100 pages, you jump back to a different character, and that section reads entirely like you're just sat reading a like detailed piece of lore on like the game's like Wikipedia article or something like that, which sounds bad, but that is entirely my taste, and I love when books read like that, especially video game books, because I am one of those people that does sit and read like the game wiki for like just for fun. So to get that in a book was really great, and I really enjoyed that, and it picked up from that point on, and then, you know, you got slightly more action and slightly more like interaction between the characters as like their paths all converged, and it was much better from that point on. I still feel like it has kind of a way to go, but I do have the second novel and I definitely plan on reading it. So I rated this 3 out of 5 stars because the second half of the book really saved it for me, but that first 100 pages, it sucked. I think if this hadn't been set in one of my favourite video game worlds and I hadn't just felt like the nostalgia and such an urge to go back and play Oblivion, then maybe I would have rated it lower, but that's my own bias. And I'm allowed to have it. So yeah, there were the 10 books that I read this month, and I'm super proud of myself. Like, I'm so happy that I managed to actually read this many books, especially considering like I've still been putting out videos and I have a full-time job, and to be fair, I don't have a social life, so like maybe that's it. Oh, my head is the wrong shape for this stupid crown. Like, how many rulers have ever said that? So yes, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm like just super pumped to be able to actually do a wrap up with like a decent amount of books for once. It's very satisfying for me. Do let me know if any of you guys read any of these books, especially if you took part in Medieval-a-thon. Like, how far did you get? Did you achieve the rank of king or queen? You know, like what books did you read for what prompts? Like, totally feel free to tell me in the comments below. I know a lot of people were like thinking of reading some of the same books as me, and we've had like a few conversations about it, so it would be really great to hear how everyone else got on and like what books you did or didn't end up reading. So yeah, that's been it from me. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you guys hopefully in the next one. Peace out, booktube.